Welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Ethan, also known as Tabasco. I'm sure like all of us know him as Tabasco and not Ethan, but I know his real name now. Yeah, Ethan is a DevRel for Particle Network, which we can also get into because we only see him on Twitter a lot yapping. So maybe his title should be changed to Chief Yapping Officer, but I'll let Ethan introduce himself.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll see. Maybe chief yapping officer. I think I'm going to suggest that to my CEO. I think it's a good idea because basically, I do develop relations at Particle, but this is kind of like my official title. Basically, what I do at Particle is that I do a lot of our public-facing communication. So I basically yap on Twitter. I shitpost about chain abstraction, and I talk about how much I love chain abstraction all day. And so that's a big part of my job. I do a lot of kind of product-related research and marketing and stuff like that for Particle. Most importantly, I've basically spent the past year, helping a lot in terms of creating a lot of the foundational content and building a lot of the foundations for the narrative of chain abstraction, both from Particle's perspective and just more broadly around how that vertical has evolved. And so I've spent every day for the past year since December of last year thinking about this whole idea, and so I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm also interested in knowing like how did you get into this position, right? Because like you said, you joined as a DevRel, but now you have the responsibility of kind of representing your brand on Twitter, on like different podcasts, conferences. So like, what does that conversation look like with your team? Like, okay, you're the guy we trust to represent the brand because it's a big responsibility.
Yeah, I've always sort of been a little bit inclined towards that. Even in at the organization I was at before, which was an RPC provider called ChainStack. At the end of my time there, I was also pretty much a representative of that brand to some degree, not in the same capacity that I am with Particle, but I was. It was a big part of my role, which that I was producing a lot of, in that case, developer content, and I was very public about it. And I've always been pretty comfortable with this, posting on Twitter and creating content. Even before I started working in Web3, it was something that I was very active in doing. At Particle, starting developer relations, I did a lot of documentation over time. Really, what was the big thing for me is that I decided to do a lot of developer tutorial videos. And so I did like 30-minute walkthrough, 50-minute walkthrough, 10-minute walkthrough, and how you can do these things with our SDKs on these different chains, on these applications. And so I did like multiple videos per week, and I posted those over and over and did snippets and all these different things. And those ended up getting pretty good engagement. Like I had public chains that would retweet me all the time. I would get 200, 300 likes on some posts with these developer tutorials. And then over time, that sort of evolved into me doing a little bit more of my individual posting, just out of, not because I was like asking Particle, hey, can I do this officially? But it was just like I was getting good engagement and I wanted to keep that up. The issue though is that for me, I was very afraid of doing frequent posts because I really wanted to make sure like every post I did had high engagement. Because I was like, if I do a post that gets like low engagement, then maybe that's like, oh, I'm just not doing very well and I don't have great traction. And so I need to like, do very infrequent posts. And so I would do like maybe one or two posts a week plus the videos that I was doing. And then over time, especially as basically like in 1 year ago, we decided we're like, okay, we want to get into chain abstraction. And my CEO asked that I would handle the growth of the narrative, both our own positioning within the narrative as well as the broader chain abstraction narrative and how we can grow it. Because we entered that vertical when there was essentially zero around it. I think the only protocol that was really pushing heavily for chain abstraction at that time was Near, as well as Printer Research, who had like basically right after we joined published the Cake framework. And so it was very small. And so essentially he asked me, hey, can you work on this? And so I said, okay, sure. And throughout that process, I won't get into all the details of like how we went through all that. It was a big process of growing like a bunch of on the ground content and branding positioning. I actually published a very long post about how we got to this point in our brand. It was very strategic and like we took a lot of stuff out of the Celestia playbook and all these different things. But all that being said, over time, what happened is that we realized something, especially after reviewing how Celestia handled their brand growth and their narrative growth, which is that you know, especially when you want to have a brand that is well recognized, people connect with people way faster than they connect with brands. And so there are very few brands in the market that have no like large public representatives. Like every most popular crypto brand has somebody that you affiliate with it as like the personification of that brand, right? For Base, it's Jesse. For Joker Race, it's David. For Celestia, it's Nick. And so you always have somebody that is the image of that brand. Even like for Movement, it's Rushi. And so like we were like, okay, well, this is something that we're clearly missing because my founder doesn't like doing that much stuff on Twitter. He does, but he's not the type of person that like wants to tweet all the time. But I'd already been tweeting a little bit at that point, so I was like, okay, well, I can give this a try. And so slowly over time, I started tweeting a little bit more, and a little bit more about chain abstraction. And I started getting better engagement. I started posting more content. I started off with like very right curve, like long form content. And I realized that I didn't really like doing that much, and it didn't get that very good engagement. And so over time, I started slowly moving more left curve. And now you can see that in my posts that most of my things are very shallow, but it gets good engagement. And so I kind of moved to that direction. And at this point, I post 6, 7 times a day. And what we realized is that you know, through that, like through me posting, we realized very quickly that like, okay, this is a massive unlock for our brand. And so I basically shifted, slowly over the course of this year, all of my time away from developer relations as I was doing before, only to posting on Twitter, organizing all of our marketing campaigns, all of our external content, all of the podcast spaces, and basically being the personification of that brand and also driving all of our narrative growth. And so, to be honest, I enjoy this a lot more than what I was doing before. And we even hired somebody to basically do what I was doing before so that I could focus on this. And it's a lot of fun. It's been a huge unlock for us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on in your observations, right? Like people connect with people more often. Like even when we were starting Li-Fi, we used to look at Uniswap and be like, okay, everyone follows Hayden, so everyone knows Uniswap, and there would be so many examples every year, right? So all of us were like, how do we get to be those accounts that people follow? So when we started out, we had 300, 400 followers, and like you did with chain abstractions, for us, it was like the multi-chain narrative or the interop bridging narrative, and as that narrative grew, all of our accounts also grew, and like it's basically you add value, you also get value, and then the company account also gets value, right? So it's pretty like a win-win sort of a solution. If you try your best and if it sticks, everyone kind of wins, and it's actually pretty hard to find such like positive sum engagements. This is definitely one of them, and people always talk about like founder-led comms, but I don't actually believe in that. Sure, if the founder does it, it's great. But like, why does the founder have to take all the responsibility? Why can't it be like team-led comms or just anyone who wants to do comms? They can build their own distribution, right? Like a community guy can have their own brand. I can have my own. You can have your own. So everyone can kind of pull from different directions, and the brand can grow.
Yeah, I think like we're talking about this before the recording, but I think Omni is an example that I always refer to, which is like, of course, Austin is the founder, and people know him on Twitter very frequently. But really, what I would say is like one of the biggest reasons for Omni's success, and I think you actually had him on the podcast pretty recently, if I'm correct, is their BD guys and their brand on Twitter, which is Matt and Graham. And so these guys post incessantly on Twitter, and as a result, it's been a huge point of growth for Omni. And I think if they didn't have their own personal brands, Omni would not be nearly in the same position that it is today. And so it doesn't have to be only founders. And actually, I think even if you look at Movement, like Movement has Rushi, right, which is like kind of the figurehead of the brand, but you have all these other people associated with Movement that are part of the team that have also pretty strong personal brands. And so I think that like what we found is, even though it's just mostly me doing a lot of like the posting for Particle, the fact that I'm not the founder has changed pretty much nothing. And actually, most people, I don't have my role in my Twitter bio, and so most people think I'm the founder of Particle. And people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, what was it like to when you created Particle?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I didn't create Particle, but I can tell you what it was like when I joined Particle, 2 years ago or whatever." And so I think for most people, they don't even have the distinction. It's just, can you be super present? Can you accurately represent the brand? And can you engage with the community properly? And to be honest, not everybody can do this. You have to have the right type of personality to enjoy doing this and to be willing to do this and not feel burnt out from doing this. And so if you have somebody on your team or multiple people on the team that are willing to do that and that want to do that and that find enjoyment from doing that, then yeah, it's one, like, it's not even something that you can't even really put a price on it. Like it's,
Mhm.
there's no amount of like advertisement spend or like, some external content that you commission that can equate the value of having somebody natively on your team or multiple people natively on your team with strong personal brands. It's almost unavoidable for growth today. And so, like, even when, in the early days of Chain Abstraction, the way that we grew was both through my own personal brand and also through, like, this is also how I kind of grew my brand as well, which was through neutrality. And
Mhm.
so, if you look back at our posts and my posts, 6 or 7 months ago, or even longer than that, I almost posted zero about Particle, very, very little about Particle and universal accounts. I talked about almost none, unless I was on a podcast where I was specifically asked about that. I almost completely avoided the topic, not because I didn't want to talk about Particle, but because to establish yourself as, especially in that time, more of a thought leader and, actually driving the growth of the narrative, you had to be neutral and you had to promote everybody and all the ideas around it. And so, we found a lot of growth both through, and my side as well, through just like talking about things that we found interesting and not trying to constantly shill. So this is the number one thing that I see when people are trying to grow a personal brand that like makes it difficult for them to grow, is that they can't get themselves out of the need to shill themselves constantly with everything. It's like, well, take a step back and just talk about what you're interested in. And people will connect with that way faster than if you're just like, oh, I like this topic. Go follow us. We're doing this topic the best. We're doing the best here. We're doing great. It's like, this is like, I'm glad that you're passionate about your protocol, but you will do more damage than good by constantly shilling. You can shill eventually, but just like give yourself some time to grow a brand. And so that's another thing that, I think we found a lot of success in, was being neutral and kind of growing the pie, more positive sum attitude in
Mhm.
that.
I mean, so it's not that hard, not that easy, right, to actually be neutral. Because, like, to be honest, when you're talking about it, you sound that you had it all figured out. But I think, like, when we were doing it, it was we didn't have everything figured out. But because we're an aggregator, we ended up being neutral in our comms and like research. So, like, a lot of this stuff I learned while we were doing it, that it helps to be neutral, because then you can like actually grow the pie and be positive sum. So like I totally agree with all of those points, and there I feel like we have a lot of commonalities there. And some of this stuff cannot be incentivized, right? Like you have to have personal motivation to actually be the guy who's doing the comms. Like you can't pay someone to do this. Sure, you can, but if they're not like incentivized to build their own brand, or like to kind of leave their mark on crypto, I feel they're not going to do it, right? Like at least that's how I see it. So whenever someone asks me like what motivates you to just like be more active, be more public, it's literally no reason other than the fact that I like doing this. It's so simple, but it actually works.
Yeah, I agree. Really, the thing that motivates me is that little number by the bell icon on Twitter. That's the source of dopamine every single day. And on your iPhone, you get that little, what, it's like a certain sound for the Twitter notification. That's what keeps me going and posting every day. I'm like, okay,
I mean,
got 20
there's no
likes,
way
and
you have notifications on at this point. Like I turned off notifications 2 years ago, so I don't
I
believe that.
I keep it on just because it's like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, okay, somebody with like some real person engaged with my tweet, oh, I have 20 likes here, and I'm like, okay, I like this. This is motivating me to like keep posting. And so, but yeah, no, I agree with everything you said. I think it's people ask me all the time. They're like, like I said, I did this big post about it. It was like a year ago, with Particle, pretty much nobody knew who we were except a few niche people in the account abstraction space. And of course, we were connected with you guys for a long time because we used you in a lot of our older products, but basically the only change that happened is that we realized early on that you know we're operating in like the social login and the account abstraction space at that point, and there's a lot of other players getting into it. And to be honest, the way that I have always seen it is it's sort of a race to zero. How cheap can you get your social logins, the custody applications, and then it's just how much BD can you do. So like we don't want to be in a position where like we're just like spending all day trying to take mindshare away from Privy or whatever. And like this was just not an ideal future for us. And so we were like, well, chain abstraction is a risk that we can take that might pay off, or it might ruin us as a business, to be honest, because we might be allocating all of our resources towards this for the next 6 months and it dies out. And then what are we going to do? Right. We're screwed. And so we took a huge leap in that. We basically said, listen, we're going to bet everything on this like niche narrative because we think that it's important and we think that it's going to be genuinely impactful. And so that's what we did. We basically dropped everything that we had. We actually previously were a SaaS-based revenue model. We dropped our SaaS-based revenue model. We basically just eliminated our channel of revenue to say, listen, we are all in on chain abstraction, and we're going to do everything that we can to grow our position and to make this a real tangible narrative. And what I tell people is, like, for me, the sort of like reflection moment was actually during DevCon in Bangkok, which is that I was sitting there at these talks, listening to Jesse and Vitalik and Hart from Across and these guys sitting on stage talking about chain abstraction and their thoughts around it. And I'm walking around and I'm walking through the DevCon main venue and it's like every 5 steps, oh, chain abstraction, well, particle. And like I go to these different events and all these panels about chain abstraction. We had Abstract Summit, which was packed the entire day. And so all of this, I look back on it and it's like, this is just like the amount of growth in this narrative has been insane. And so it's like there's so much hype, and we got very lucky. We made a very good bet. And so that alongside some nice decisions around growing a personal brand and me getting addicted to Twitter resulted in where we're at today, which I think is a good position. But we still have, in my opinion, I think in chain abstraction we have a very long way to go. I think we've had a lot of hype. People generally understand what the idea is now, which is great, but still virtually nobody has shipped anything. So this is the problem. Is that so? Like I would probably consider like the product that we recently shipped, Universal X, to be probably the first, like what I would say, and I'm not only saying this because my bags or whatever, but I really do think that like probably the first genuinely chain abstracted product. There are some demos out there that I would consider to be in that same realm, like the Magic Account demo potentially, and some of the stuff from Near. But I think in terms of like a full product, it's the first one. And what I really want, especially over the next few months, is that every other protocol needs to ship apps like this, or like at least
Mhm.
apps need to ship with these protocols, because the issue is that chain abstraction, we're getting at a point now where like we're just talking in circles about everything. We're like, oh, we're going to do this great thing. We got to get rid of fragmentation. We got to improve the user experience. It's like, okay, yeah, great. Like, okay, we've talked about all this shit for a long time. Like, can we actually ship something now that makes an impact and people can use and get their hands on and will actually do what we want to say that we're doing? And so it's taken us a year to get to a point where we can actually ship a single product that is chain abstracted. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we've done it. And so, like, we've taken the year to yap about this whole narrative. And so now we've shipped it. And what I really want to see is people actually, like, not only just us, but like, I want to see by February 15 fully, like, really chain abstracted products that exist out there and they gain true traction. I think it's possible, and I think
Mhm.
it's feasible given all the protocols in this space. But I think we need to move away from just like the constant roundhouse conversation around what is chain abstraction, why it is important. We've talked that whole topic to death. Now let's actually ship something. And so this is going to be the really important thing. And I think,
Mhm.
of course, there's still some pushback against chain abstraction. I think there's still some criticism around it. But to be honest, I think the only way to get past all this like conceptual stuff that people are worried about is to ship things and prove to people like, like, listen, this is an unavoidable trend that we need to implement from a user experience standpoint. There's no other alternative.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of the way that I'm looking at the narrative in this current state.
Yeah, I mean, so you guys took a big bet. It of course worked out in the sense that the mind share is there, the narrative has grown, and Particle is definitely front and center of it. You are definitely front and center of it, and you're also right about the exhaustion in some of the chain abstraction spaces, podcasts, because a lot of the repetitive stuff is being said, right? Like because there's no product, like you rightly said. And I was going through a lot of the videos, and it's honestly hard to find something new to talk about with you because you've been on so many of these episodes. But like I curated a list of hot takes on chain abstraction from like across Twitter articles in general, and I'm just gonna go through some of them and we can have a conversation, right? And it actually covers a lot of the points that you mentioned in like your last answer. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of value to come out of it. So I think the first one was mostly about like how there's the chain abstraction is a VC solution to some of the problem. Uh, uh, some of the fragmentation problem in the space that in the first place is coming because like VCs funded a lot of chains, right? So personally, I definitely agree with the fact that there's like a misalignment in incentive because VCs were funding apps, sorry, VCs were funding chains. So there's now a lot of chains. And now it's just like, okay, the UX is fragmented. So what do? We have to build like unification solutions. So it's not wrong, but like in general, what do you think about this? Like, is chain abstraction a VC solution to some of these like chains that are there in the first place because VCs funded them?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting criticism that I've heard only once or twice before, but I think to be honest, I would actually agree with it to some degree. I think that the VC, like the incessant VC funding of chains and L2s that probably don't really need that much funding or shouldn't exist in the first place, is rampant. And chain abstraction is also a VC funded solution to that problem. We are funded by many VCs in the space that I'm sure have also funded the problem itself. And so, but I don't. So that being said, I actually would say that yes, to some degree, it is. It could fall within that definition, but I think that the chain abstraction shouldn't be reduced to that, because from a broader perspective, especially within the Ethereum ecosystem, and even just more broadly, we've realized that Web3 is not going to scale through a single like global state machine that everybody's going to use like one chain. Maybe some of the Solana guys will disagree with me on this, but I think that we've matured to a point where it's like, okay, the better approach is clearly distributed chains. So whether that's app chains or purpose-built blockchains or vertical specific blockchains or whatever, having numerous chains in a distributed network of blockchains is better in terms of decentralization, in terms of overall scalability, than a single chain, just like from a physics standpoint, like computational standpoint could ever be. And so like if we have distributed virtually infinitely scalable block space, then this is great. And so like we need this for long-term scalability and for incentives. And so like we can have a whole conversation around like how app chains, all these things, and like siloing between chains are like an incentive problem for application developers. But anyways, the problem is that, or the point is that we have almost made an objective case for that. We need more chains, and that having more chains is not a bad thing, and it's a good thing, and that's the roadmap that we need to go down, right? And so with that being recognized, chain abstraction is it's non-negotiable actually. It comes down to a condition, which is that are we going to pursue the roadmap of having app chains, more rollups, and go through go to the route of being a distributed ecosystem? If we are, then chain abstraction has to happen. If we don't, then maybe chain abstraction isn't important. If we want to stick to just having, like a few monoliths that kind of compete for mindshare, then fine. But I think we already did that for the first 10 years of crypto's experience. And so now we're moving past that into a more sustainable future. And so if we're going to go down that path is not possible in terms of like being sustainable from a user experience perspective without chain abstraction. So we need chain abstraction to basically enable that to feel as if like a user is using a single global state machine. Because the reason why Solana is so popular today, for example, or why these like, kind of big base layer chains that want to be that kind of like global machine are popular is because from a user experience standpoint, it's all the same, right? Every application that uses the same. It's very consistent as a user. I have my wallet and I go in and I use applications. That's what we want, right? Whereas like the app chain ecosystem or the modular ecosystem is very different in that every app that I use pretty much is going to be siloed between one another, different wallets maybe, or different balances. It's just a huge pain in the ass for users. And so the idea is that if we can instead have a distributed ecosystem that can be scalable in that sense, but also at the same time can have the user experience of like a single monolithic chain, then why would anybody use that original monolithic chain? Objectively, having a distributed network of blockchains is better. I mean, again, some people disagree with me on this, but it's better. And if you can match
That
user
was always
experience,
the plan, right? Like that was always the plan with the roll-up centric roadmap. So I don't think there's any point in actually saying that this is all VC funded. Like this is actually the roll-up centric roadmap coming to life. There's a chain for everything. Sure, like Ethereum could tomorrow release a native interop standard and solve a lot of the UX problems. And I feel like Vitalik is also just like promoting ERC 7683 for intents, and there's like a standard for AA that I feel will be accelerated now because of some of these problems. So you can clearly see that there's a push towards unifying Ethereum or like unifying the rollup centric roadmap, right? So chain abstraction in general makes sense for sure. Nobody can actually disagree with that. So another criticism that comes out of it is actually like, let's say, there's one world where Ethereum has this native solution, right? But there's this other world where all of these chain abstraction protocols are coming up, and then we're kind of building proprietary tech to solve this problem. And again, we're going to have like 5 different chain abstraction solutions. So do you think like there's going to be fragmentation again across chain abstraction protocols, or like how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, this is another good question that, to be honest, I think and you also, this kind of also ties into a point that you made on Twitter, and you asked the question of like, is security assumptions of chain abstraction solutions a big issue that we need to be talking more about? So this all boils down to the role that chain abstraction solutions play in a user lifecycle. I think when you look at like the whole question of fragmentation between chain abstraction solutions, usually the way that it materializes is like, I need a different account for every chain abstraction solution, right? So it's like, oh, I need an account for like, I don't know, magic accounts. I need my universal account. I need whatever other account is being created. In my opinion, I think all fragmentation between chain abstraction solutions is exclusively because of ERC 437 and the architectural issues of ERC 437, and that we require every user to maintain a distinct smart contract as a means of interaction. And so I think all of the concerns around like fragmentation as an issue with chain abstraction is effectively removed with things like 7702 or native account abstraction, where you like I can execute arbitrary code alongside an existing account. The issue is that I need to move funds between distinct accounts. If that's eliminated and I can execute any sort of like code with my existing account, then there's no need to have that fragmentation. And this gets to the point of like, okay, so what point in that life cycle does a chain abstraction solution play? Now, this isn't the same for every solution. Some solutions use escrows or chain abstracted balances, which is something different. But I'm going to like look at it from at least our perspective in the way that I think they should operate, which is that I think most chain abstraction solutions should just be an intermediary of execution. So what I mean by this is that when I'm doing a transaction, I have my account. My account can either do a single chain transaction where I'm just doing a normal operation that requires no intermediary. It's just me writing a ledger entry on chain, as I do with MetaMask right now, right? Or I can do a chain abstracted transaction, which is automatically bridging for me, which is just a different means of executing my goal. But I'm just asking a third party to say, hey, can you do these extra operations for me to meet the condition of the transaction that I'm doing? And so the trust there is very little. And the role that it plays is actually pretty minimal when you think about it. The reason why it feels like chain abstraction solutions are so obtrusive today is because of ERC 437. But really, all they're doing is just adding to the execution of whatever that you're doing. And you're just saying, yeah, I want, for example, a solver to move these funds over to this chain for me, or front liquidity for my transaction. And I'm okay with that being done with the funds I have on these X other chains. And so from the user perspective, they're still maintaining their same account, their same source of funds, ideally. And all they're doing is they're just signing a transaction, which is like, instead of paying for the transaction directly using the funds that they have on a given chain, they're just repaying a solver to front liquidity for their transaction. And so it's a really minimal change. It's just a change in a means of execution. And so I don't think that fragmentation is a big issue. And I think that chain abstraction plays a smaller role in that transaction life cycle than most people think it does. I think it's actually very minimal in terms of how users experience it, especially with things like 7702.
I mean, so it's kind of like intents plus A at the end of the day, right? Like the execution is just outsourced, but you can do a lot of cool abstractions because of account abstraction. And then the fragmentation is there because there's basically no standard that's native to Ethereum. So everyone kind of ends up building their own account because there's like no other way to do it. So again, it seems like Ethereum has to have a standard at some point so that we can move past some of these issues, right? And then like another thing that comes up often about chain abstraction is like what chains do you expose to the users, or like how do you decide what chains are secure enough or decentralized enough, right? Like I think Vitalik wrote a blog recently about like wallets and the experience that he thinks is ideal. So he mentioned that some of the UX improvements kind of incentivize like UX improvements, but like disincentivizes security and decentralization for the chains, right? But I feel like the chain abstraction protocols will have a very big role to play here because at the end of the day, a particle or like a universal X kind of decides what chains to expose. So like, how are you guys thinking about abstractions, and what is the right level of like hiding all of these details? How do you think about that?
Yeah, this is an issue that Vitalik has brought this up a few different times in some panels, and some other guys like the Enoma guys have had this this criticism as well. And I always very strongly disagree with the whole basis of this criticism, which is, and I think the fact that this is so commonly assumed is just representative of like how intellectually siloed most people in the space are, because they assume people are way more intelligent than most people actually are. Because like Vitalik and all these guys are assuming that anybody cares about the security assumptions of the underlying chains that they're interacting with. Now, in my opinion, Web3 natives often do, because we're a very niche group of enthusiasts for the most part. But most users care almost none about security implications. People are going to use whatever gets them to their end goal. Now, if there's like major security implications that people obviously know about, then they'll avoid it. But I think most of us severely overestimate the willingness and the capability of the average person to assess the trust assumptions of the blockchain that they're interacting with an application on. This is just like when you tell a normal person this, like, oh, your application is built on Solana. Actually, Solana had a block reorg, a few weeks ago. Like, what people don't care about, they just want to use an application and have their action be done for them. And so the way that I see it is that but it's valid though, is that like chains have different trust assumptions. But
Yeah.
the point that I'm making is that we cannot expect users to care about this and to manage this on their own, because they don't care enough about this. And even if we want them to, they're not capable of making decisions around this that make any sense, because most people are not the average person in Web3 right now. And so the way that you fix this is really simple. It's just that you trust apps and you trust wallets to make decisions for you. And so for something like Universal X or whatever other app is chain abstracted, or whatever wallet they're using, that wallet or app has an incentive to make secure decisions about what they're doing, because if they don't, they could lose user funds, or something bad could happen. And that's a reflection of them, not of the user or the chain. It's a reflection of the point that they're trusting to make those decisions, which is the app or the wallet. And so, back to what Vitalik's original point was, maybe it disincentivizes chains to focus on user experience, or to focus on security. This is this point doesn't make any sense if you acknowledge that most users don't care about this. Now, if we were in a world where every user cared about security assumptions, then maybe if we got rid of all those from the user experience, maybe these chains wouldn't care as much about it. But developers care about this because it reflects the security of their application. And so developers aren't going to build on a chain that doesn't prioritize security, because if they do, then their application is at risk of losing users, because then users aren't going to trust them anymore. And so the incentives are still absolutely there, but for developers. And then those applications make secure decisions because from a business standpoint, they need to. And so they only interact with chains that are important, or that are secure, and wallets only allow users to hold funds or deposit or whatever it may be. I don't know how they can handle it, but they'll do something to make sure that users are making secure decisions and they aren't interacting with chains that potentially have issues. And so I think it's just another point of trust that people need to have, and that we cannot expect normal users to handle this on their own.
I mean, so like, I agree with a lot of things that you said, but I also agree with the fact that users do not care about security. So one thing I agree with is that the application developers need to be more opinionated, right? Like it's their choice to build on secure chains or like expose relatively not so secure chains, because like there's some meme coin that people want to ape into. But at the end of the day, it's like it depends on the app that's using it, right? So if it's a wallet and users use that app as their bank account, let's say, and they're storing that like their life savings, it has to be secure, right? So you would only expose chains like Ethereum, maybe the top L2s, Solana, right? But then if it's like a meme coin trading account, you can have Solana base, and then some people were aping into shitcoins on Ripple. I don't even know how to get there, but you can do that, right? So it's always a spectrum, and you can the application developers can choose what part of the spectrum their product is based on.
Yeah, I think even wallets and apps, the whole concept of even exposing these chains probably won't be relevant in terms of like, at least in terms of awareness. I think what it'll be is like, for example, if I have a chain abstracted wallet that is really important for the security of my funds, and I deposit funds on Base, Solana, and Arbitrum, right? And for some reason, that's where they came from as a user. Then maybe wallets will just hold those on a chain that they believe is going to be the most secure for the application. So maybe those wallets
Yeah.
just like during the deposit process, they move it over to Ethereum. But as a user, again, because I'm chain agnostic, I don't care if it's on Ethereum or if it's on Base or Solana or whatever, because I'm just trusting that wallet is going to be secure and that they're making secure decisions about, how my funds are secured. And of course, like it's not custodial, but it's just like there's decisions that I'm trusting there as to the security of what I'm doing. And so I think the same will go for applications. Like whenever I'm interacting with a contract on an application, they're only going to execute that contract on chains or a chain that they trust is going to be secure. And so I know we're using the word trust a lot here, which some people don't like, but to have like a consumer ready ecosystem, there needs to be some points of trust, because like I don't think like a fully trustless, everybody makes decisions on everything, security, wallets, people have their own seed phrases. They, have hardware. This is a cypherpunk pipe dream that I don't think is ever going to happen. I think that you need to make some compromise for normal people.
Mhm.
And I think that these are compromises that are fine. Because it's actually probably better, because like I said, most people aren't capable of making these decisions. And so if you outsource these decisions to people that are capable and are actually incentivized to make the right decisions about this, like wallets and apps, then perhaps users will actually have a more secure experience than what they do today.
I mean, so like this brings me to another question, right? Like, how do you think about brands in this sort of world? Because even in our conversations, we're just saying it does not matter which chain the user is on, right? Like, it doesn't matter if they're on Ethereum, Solana, Base, or Arbitrum. It just matters what wallet they're using, right? So their relationship with Phantom, for example, is more important, or their relationship with a jumper is more important, or Universal X is more important. So do you think that there will be a world where, like right now, marketing is very chain focused. Ethereum does not do any marketing, but any new chain is very loud on Twitter, right? Like everyone knows about Monad, Parachain. There are so many more chains, right? But in this world where a chain is kind of just the backend, it would probably be the applications that are more loud. So I'm curious, like if you think about it the same way, and that's also one of the reasons why you guys built out Universal X, maybe not sure.
Yeah. So this is, I've gotten in some trouble for talking about this before and sharing some of my thoughts with the Barachain guys and some of the Solana guys. They don't like it, my take on this, but I think that, and absolutely nothing against these guys that like do really heavy chain specific marketing. I think it's fine, but I think that the whole idea of marketing chains to users is like AWS marketing to like, I don't know, like your grandparents to say, hey, please come use apps built on AWS. It's like, well, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to go use whatever app that I want to. I don't care that it's built on AWS. This is irrelevant for me. That's going to be a very ineffective marketing campaign for them. And so I think this is the direction that we need to go in, which is that like most chains, the reason why they market to users today is because it matters. And it makes sense that they do it, right? Because users are going to use the chains they want to, and they're explicit about that. But that's not how it should be. It's the same way as if we required everybody to define, I had to go use GCP apps or AWS apps or whatever, or Azure apps. This is just a dynamic that doesn't make sense from a user experience standpoint. And so users are just going to use apps and they're going to use wallets. And so I think for most users, the brands of the chains that the apps that they're using are built on will be totally irrelevant. I think that users should have no concept of I'm using an app on Berachain or I'm using an app on Solana. And these chains are going to need to switch their marketing to being more developer centric, because for these chains, the only group of people that matters to their success is developers, because they can't attract users directly. And so the only way that they can gain users and gain volume is through good applications being built on their chains, which then attract users. And so now it's just a matter of they will make, like, Berachain is always going to be their brand that they are today, but they can't be user facing over time, in my opinion. I think they're going to have to be way more developer facing, where the only way that they grow is through growing developers. And now the caveat here is that Web3 is very investor centric. And so there's always going to be investor culture around these chains, right? People that buy the tokens and that shill the chain and whatever. That's always going to exist, I think. And like, there's the tokens create some culture around these chains that are going to persist. But I think that most normal users are not going to have any concept of what chains they're using, and those brands are going to be totally removed from them. I don't think most people are going to know what Solana or Ethereum, maybe Ethereum, but like outside of investing, like I think most people are going to have very little concept of infrastructurally what chain do they use, because this is not really important to them.
I mean, I feel like it's a crypto problem as well, right? Like as an industry, it's so small that some of the most well-funded, most recognized teams are actually chain teams. So we just hear the most from them. So like the one example that I have for this is actually Polymarket. Like nobody in the real world, or like nobody who voted on the US elections actually knows that the app was on Polygon, right? So that's the perfect example. But then how many breakout apps like Polymarket do we have today? Maybe 3. So I feel like what you're saying is correct, but for it to play out, crypto needs to be just so much bigger that my fear is that it'll probably take, I don't know, 5-10 years where we have 100 breakout apps that even my dad is using, or like to let's say vote on the Indian elections or something, right? Like just as an example. So I feel like we're pretty far away from that moment for the industry. But when we are there, I feel like we will have more app brands than chain brands. Like Polymarket is the perfect example. But we need more Polymarkets for this world to actually go into that direction where apps are more powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need, more app brands than chain brands. And I think that a lot of this can be attributed to, and this is a little speculative, but I think most of this, like the question is like, why don't we have more breakout apps like Polymarket? Is it just because we don't have enough ideas? Maybe. Is there not enough good use cases of crypto? Maybe. But I don't think the excuse of, the user experience is just not good enough to have more apps like
Yeah.
Polymarket. I think this is not, especially today, this is an irrelevant point. There's plenty of things. Polymarket exists because there's plenty of tools that enable it to have a pretty accessible user experience, all things considered. And so I think that a lot of it probably comes down to incentives, which is that, especially with how the market exists today, I don't really think that we are as efficient as like a true free market in terms of promoting innovation at the application level. Because unless you have like some insane idea like Polymarket that just like blows everything else out of the water, that exceeds the boundaries of chains, the issue is that like most developers are not really that incentivized to build applications, or to build like unique applications, because like I can build some fork of some existing application of some DEX, I can deploy on a few different chains and I earn enough revenue from that. The issue is that like competition is siloed to whatever chains that I deploy on, right? So like when I'm deploying on Polygon, usually I'm competing with apps on Polygon because that's where user mindshare is siloed and people are explicitly on Polygon. And so I hate to like segue into like, chain abstraction is going to fix everything, but I think that like if you do have people that are chain agnostic in nature, then applications can build anywhere and access users universally, which means that now applications are like, there's no like, I'm getting Polygon users or Solana users, I'm just getting users. So this means that applications are now going to be way more competitive with one another because they're competing for a total industry mindshare, not just for a siloed industry mindshare. And so they have to be more innovative and more unique, and the incentives are greater to do so. Because now if I create an application that's better than, if I have app B, which is better than app A, then I can actually generate some real revenue now because there's a universal base of users that I can access. And so I think the shift of incentives from chain abstraction, from the removal of users from those distinct chains, will also hopefully help that kind of thing that you mentioned. We have more bigger app brands and chain brands, and over time, 5 years, I actually think is an okay estimate. I would be a little bit more optimistic and say I think in 3 years we'll hopefully see
I mean,
a good
maybe
number of
like
apps.
even for prediction markets, Augur built for 7 years and did not see any traction, but Polymarket took off now and they've been building for like 5 years. So even for the prediction market niche to actually blow up, it took 10 years. So I think we're also underestimating like how hard it is to build a useful app because there's like all of our daily needs are already kind of taken care of in the real world, right? Like if I want a taxi, I can just take an Uber. So unless we recreate something truly new from scratch that doesn't exist in the world, it's pretty hard to build unique applications. But I agree with the fact that, okay, at least the incentives can be changed such that there's not another new team that just goes to build Uniswap on a new chain, right? So that team can actually start thinking about building something new or just don't build anything.
Or they build a better version of Uniswap and they
Yeah,
usurp
yeah,
the mind
maybe.
share because there's a universe of its users. So something like that. Because it's just like, yeah, I think there's so few builders in this space right now that all these inefficiencies make it pretty rare when there's like an actual real application that people want to use. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
what have been the main ones? It's been Polymarket, Pump.fun, Moonshot.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know, maybe there's a few others. It just comes down to like, and to be fair, the other thing to note is that like all of those are speculative use cases. Like, and
I mean,
I asked
crypto
this on
is
Twitter.
speculation.
It is speculation, but I asked this on Twitter earlier today where I was like, listen, we have like 500 chains now. When are we going to figure out some more interesting use case than basically speculation? Everything is speculation. And I say this as somebody who's building a speculative app for chain abstraction. That was the first thing that we thought of because that's the biggest use case. But like what I would like to see really is over time we move away from like everything just being so hyper speculative and into like more interesting use cases. Like I think Deepin is super cool. Like all these these kind of verticals that kind of break the mold a little bit and aren't just like different ways to gamble. Essentially, I think is like that's a great way that crypto is utilized right now. But I think that there's more. We can be more ambitious than just like, oh, we
Mhm.
found more interesting ways to gamble and bet on different things, which is essentially most of crypto at the moment.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that chain abstraction will be one of the many steps that will bring us to hopefully an ecosystem where we have a lot of breakout apps and ideally apps with better experiences with more unique experiences than Web 2. I think like there's a ton of real potential for that, but it's just there's a number of issues that are reducing the speed at which we can achieve that. And so yeah, I hope that we kind of see that type of ecosystem in the next 3 maybe 5 years. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of things to figure out even in that world because, like, if you think about it, you have to push so hard for mindshare as chain abstraction protocols to get these developers to build on you and not a monad or like a better chain, right? So it's I still have skepticism or like my doubts about it, but I feel like at least the move is in the right direction. Where we try to build cool apps, maybe beyond speculation, maybe not, but I feel like a lot of use case of crypto is speculation right now. So like I just want to move into like the last section of this now, where like you guys launched Universal X. So I also want to give you the opportunity to like talk about that. And also like I saw one of your tweets where you mentioned there's a lot of like BS around chain abstraction because a lot of protocols haven't shipped anything yet. So there's nothing really to test out other than like 3 or 4 applications maybe and some demos, right? So what was your thinking about that specific post, one, and how do you see Universal X kind of establishing itself in the ecosystem now?
Yeah, so to start with the post I said, which was that, and I said this a few different times on Twitter, I always try to warn people like, there is a lot of bullshit around chain abstraction and people that are claiming to do chain abstraction that don't really know what it is or are not actually doing chain abstraction. And there's a lot of it. Like I said on the stage sometime, I would say that probably half of what you see about chain abstraction on Twitter is all BS and people that aren't actually doing chain abstraction. And like I think that there are a lot of really fantastic developers and protocols that are building great chain abstraction solutions. And I've tagged them before. I said like Socket, One Balance, Agoric, Omni, Cluster, Economy. If I didn't mention your name, then it's not because I don't like you guys, but I just I can't think of it right now. There are a lot of great protocols that are building it, but there are also a lot of like protocols that you probably haven't heard of or are existing larger names that they chain abstraction has been one of the fastest growing narratives of this year. And so there's a lot of protocols that see that as an opportunity. They say, okay, there's this great chain abstraction term that seems to be getting a lot of traction. Let's just like throw it into our tagline or onto our website or onto our documentation and hope that people will attach themselves to it. And they post on Twitter, oh, we're doing chain abstraction, we're doing this and that. And maybe they're doing some fancy graphics, which is like, oh, we're doing these things. It's none of it's real. And the other thing is that like if you look pretty deeply into how these guys are doing it, it's funny because like we have this internally, we talk all the time where we'll share announcements from chain abstraction providers that are literally ripping our graphics directly and throwing their logo on it from like our previous blog posts. I'm like, okay, come on, guys. Like, there's a lot of these protocols that are just like taking our graphics, or, like, putting their nice logo, or, like redoing it. It's like, okay, there's, and it makes sense, because especially if you're an older protocol, and like, you don't have that much mind share, then there are easy ways to gain that mind share again, which is that, okay, you're binding yourselves to this fancy new narrative. That's exactly what we did, to be honest. But the difference is between us and other protocols that are binding themselves to chain abstraction, alongside us and many other genuine builders in the space, is that there's real stuff being shipped. And so whenever you figure out like, okay, is this protocol BS or not, the first thing is that if you take a few minutes to read into their website and read into their white paper and go and use whatever that they have live, you can probably tell that it's either real or it's not. The other thing is, look at their founders on Twitter, look at whoever's representing their brand, and you can probably find also if they're genuinely in good faith talking about chain abstraction pretty frequently. The most important thing though is that, have they shipped something? If they have, then there's a very simple question to ask, which is that, is this a chain agnostic experience? Is this an experience that is doesn't require bridging or managing chain specific balances, things like this? And if so, then yeah, that's genuine chain abstraction. There aren't that many examples of it on the market today. Like I said, one balance is good. Socket has powered a lot of fantastic applications that have done that. Cluster has a lot of really good examples of this that are live today. Who else? I think Agoric has done some pretty good demos of this as well. And so there are real examples of this that are live. I did a thread, Orb Labs, all these kind of guys.
Mhm.
I did a thread where I went through, I said, look, there are a few real examples of this type of user experience. Here's all of them, basically laid out. And so I think that there are some great protocols that are doing this, but there's a lot that say that they're doing it and that aren't actually doing it. So my point is that if you're researching chain abstraction or you're looking into it, just be really careful about what you're researching and making sure that who you're researching is a genuine actor and is actually building chain abstraction. I've listed them out a lot of times on my Twitter account. You can probably go scroll through them and see who they are. But I think that one issue that we have with chain abstraction that I've seen pretty frequently is that researchers or people who are trying to figure out like what this is, they stumble upon some protocol that is not doing chain abstraction in good faith, or is just binding the narrative, doing some buzzwords, stuff like that. And then they get this bad taste in their mouth about chain abstraction because they don't understand what it is.
Mhm.
It's very vague, seems just like some hype VC narrative. They don't understand it because they're going to the wrong place. And so, like, I think I always tell people like spend a little bit of time, researching what it actually is, look through those top protocols that are building through it, and most importantly, go and try some applications around it. And so, like, for us to segue a little bit, Universal X was our realization that there's two things that we needed to do. First thing was that chain abstraction still hadn't really had a really great example or demo that people could have a sort of light bulb moment with, where they really understood what the chain abstraction experience looks like. Like I said, there's a few that happened pretty early. We had an early demo. Magic Counts had a nice demo. One Bounce had a good demo, but there's no product that you could actually go and use. And so what we wanted to do was create a full application, like a real product, not a demo, not a showcase, but like a real product that was built from the ground up to be chain abstracted, and use that for two things. Number one, as a good way for us to grow our brand even further, to move outside of just being a provider of SDKs and into a provider of an actual product. Very similar, like how, and we reference this all the time internally, which is like Li-Fi and Jumper, right? Like Jumper Exchange is like the implementation of that infrastructure. It's an application built, by kind of like very similar team members. And so for us, we wanted basically to do the same thing, which is that, listen, we built up
Mhm.
this infrastructure. We want to now build something with it to prove chain abstraction and to have another kind of source of revenue for ourselves, and to build a product and to have something that is just like extending our own brand. And so we were very excited to do this because we are very passionate and we think universal accounts are a great infrastructure. And so we jumped on this opportunity quickly and we launched Universal X, and that was last week actually. And so the whole idea behind that was to grow chain abstraction and grow our own brand, and to show what universal accounts are capable of, and to be a genuinely good product. And so there's a lot of room for that product to grow. It's not perfect.
Mhm.
We aren't application developers necessarily. And so we've gained a lot of feedback from this over the past week of people telling us like the fees are too high, or like this button doesn't really make sense, or all these different things that are just like, we're optimizing for. But the core experience, the resounding feedback that we've gotten is that people overall have this reaction, which is like, I get it now. This is
Mhm.
the experience that I want with chain abstraction. Before I didn't really understand it, but now I understand what your guys are trying to do here. I understand what the vision of chain abstraction is in terms of the overall user experience, and I like it, and I'm on board with it. And so we've had pretty good volume, pretty good like user retention overall, even just since launching it like less than 7 days ago, or I guess roughly 7 days ago on the dot. And so the response has been way better than we were expecting.
Mhm.
we have some things to improve, but overall, I did this talk in Abstract Summit called Chain Abstraction Needs a Light Bulb Moment. It needs a product or an initial thing to get people to understand what chain abstraction is and why this is going to be an important infrastructural change. Universal X was our take on that. And I think that we've so far been successful in delivering on a product that can successfully be a light bulb moment for a lot of people in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the perfect example of putting your money where your mouth is, right? Like you have to lead from the front. And even for someone like me who's used a lot of applications, who uses crypto pretty much every day, Universal X has something new, right? Like some improvements on the general experience. So I feel like even if it does not materialize into, let's say, the next Uniswap, for example, it will still give people ideas around like what you can improve in terms of UX. And in general, I feel like there are so many opportunities just through that. And in the chain abstraction narrative, of course, there are so many challenges as well. But that's true for anything that's early, right? Like when we started out, nobody liked bridges. Even today, nobody likes bridges. But at least like that whole thing has grown from where it was in the last 3 years. So I feel like you guys will also go through multiple stages, and you've done the first part right in terms of building the narrative, making sure that your brand is front and center of it. So I feel like you're definitely in a very good position to take it up a notch from here. Will there be real usage? That only time will tell, right? So there's no point speculating about that. But thanks a lot for doing this. I feel like I got to know you a lot better because we've not had a full conversation before this. So this was nice because I got to like ask like a lot of questions and just get to know you better, see how you think about things. And I feel like we did cover a lot of topics that people might find something useful from this, right? So thanks a lot for your time and thanks for being flexible. I know I will like change the schedule multiple times for this one.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Like I said, I have a very strange schedule, so this worked out very well for me. And so I think I appreciate you having me on. You know, I watched some of the other ones with Austin from Omni, and you know, these are dope. And I thought those were really good questions. And so yeah, I'm excited to see how it's received. And you know, you mentioned I thought about this. You mentioned people didn't like bridges originally, and our tagline for Universal X is never bridge again. And so, no offense to Leaf, you know, we actually use Leaf.I underneath a lot of like
I
a
mean,
huge
that's
part of
the
that
thing, right?
application.
Like
Yeah.
the whole point of Li-Fi is to actually abstract that entire experience. But it's just like the mental model today of people is to use chains. Like people go from one chain to another. So until that mental model does not change, bridging is not going anywhere. So you can use any tagline, it's okay. But as soon as that whole outlook towards using crypto changes, it does not matter, right? Like you can abstract a lot of this stuff, which is why Li-Fi exists. You are using Li-Fi, Jumper uses Li-Fi, so you can just switch some of the UX features.
Yeah, it's like, you know, we don't handle any of the like the bridging or the liquidity swapping or stuff like that, and so Li-Fi is basically 100% on all that on the EVM side. So yeah, it's we say never bridge again, but we use plenty of bridges underneath, and you know, it's a big part of it. But anyways, yeah, thank you again for having me. This was dope. I really enjoyed it, and looking forward to pushing it out.
Awesome.